just before I get into the tutorial, I'd just like to let you guys know that I do have a Gumroad with a bunch of free assets for you guys to use, so feel free to check that out. Also, definitely have a look at my Instagram and check out some of the work I'm uploading. A lot of the stuff I upload there, I end up doing tutorials on in the future. So it's great to see what you're going to get in the future, you know. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoy this. I'm trying to make as much content as I can in the time I have with my job and other commitments. So yeah, I hope you guys are enjoying this stuff and you want to see more. So see you soon. Okay, so I'm going to delete everything in our scene and bring in our FBX file. So once we've got file, we're going to see that it's quite choppy and a bit too quick. So what we can do is we can go 60 frames per second, time stretching. We're just going to set this to 500 and that should be nice and smooth now. Okay, so we're just going to make a new collection and we're just going to drag this into here and then we're going to hide everything. This is kind of all the data we need and it's just this moving geometry. Obviously, this is really dependent on your model, but you know, this is what mine looks like. I can link where to get this from. You do need a Creative Cloud subscription to use this, but I'm sure you can find something for free. Anyway, we're going to go into geometry nodes and we are going to make a new group input. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a mesh to points node on here, and that is basically gonna just make this black. We're gonna see this a little bit better. It basically instances a point on every vertex of the model. At the moment, that's quite dense. I think that's okay. Obviously, you know, the more geometry, the harder it's gonna be to simulate, but I think this is okay for now. So I guess the setup is actually quite simple. So we have our points. You know, there's some different routes that we can take in terms of distributing points. So we could use we could use a distribute points on faces node, which is going to randomly distribute these points, which gives a bit more of a natural look. We can go for Poisson disk and just increase or decrease that density factor. We can increase the distance between those points. We can also use an edge angle node, which basically allows us to use the edge angle as a selection for where the points are distributed. So you can see in these really flat areas, you don't get any points. And we can use a map range node, and we can just plug that into here, and we could set this to 64. And if we start pulling this up, it's going to reduce the amount and kind of clip until it's kind of clipping against that steepest angle, I guess. You know, you can reduce the density factor. You could use noise. You could also use a scene time, and if you multiply the math, if you say multiplied the frames by a value, so if we have a value and we set that into the density factor, we set that to maybe 10 for now, and you actually multiplied this by itself. So over time, let me just set the point radius here, set point radius, just make that a little bit larger so you can see that. So say we started with a number really small, like 0.01. So we have 1 point there, and using scene time, we can multiply this value here into the density factor. So over time, more points are generated. So if we just play this, you can kind of see what's happening. Over time, more and more points are getting generated, which can, you know, create quite a nice trail effect. And I'll just show you now. So in the simulation zone, this basically repeats or creates a feedback loop for anything in here to be calculated. So if you plug this into here and then add a join geometry node, plug this into here as well, and then plug that into there. And if we just go back, we can see how this looks. So you get this quite small amount and then quite a dense amount, which creates almost like a smoke effect, you know, and you could reduce this even more and create and you know, as you can see, it starts at a really small amount and then much denser amount. And you know, you could even go again and multiply this on itself like that, so that over time it gets more stark or steep, that transition. So you start from a very small amount to a very large amount. So yeah, you kind of get the setup. But for this tutorial, and what I personally think looks best, is using the mesh to points node and actually using that geometry. It's quite a good distribution and it's gridded, it's been well modeled. So yeah, I guess it just fits the best for this kind of aesthetic. This is quite an intense thing to render or to simulate, so I'd recommend saving at this point. So once you've got that saved, what you can do is we can just run this through for a little bit, and as you can see, it's getting slower and slower as time goes on, but I think that should do for now. I think I'm gonna go to about here, so you kind of get half a cycle, and we can see these really beautiful kind of moments here where it's kind of the hands rolling over on itself as it goes back to its original position. So we have our points, but we need to use a curve to kind of follow these lines, or to connect each point. So what we can do is we can add a points to curve node, and what that does is basically turns all of these points into curves, and we go into wireframe view. It's connecting all the different points with curves. So what we can do now to actually see this as geometry is add a curve to mesh node, like so. Plug that in there, and then we want to use a curve circle, like so. I'm going to set this to 6. Hopefully you can see this okay. And I'm just going to plug that into the profile curve. And I'm also going to add fill curve, the fill caps, and we can see this. It's a bit of a mess at the moment. It looks like the points aren't actually being connected properly. So we need to tell this network to only connect to the points that are from the previous position. So, you know, we have one point here, we have one point there, and we just want to tell it to only connect to these 2 points. So we need to kind of define the index number of that initial point, and then once that's defined, it'll only connect to that index point that goes across here, if that makes sense. I'm not sure if I explained that too well, but essentially what we need to do is we need to set the ID. So here's the ID up here, and we just want to tell that to be set here, and then we can add the index to the ID, like so. And then what we can do here is add the ID and then just plug that into here. So we just have to run that again so it can recalculate those points. It's obviously going to take a little bit longer because it's now calculating the curved circle as well, which is creating more geometry. And I think about 70 should do. So I think that's quite a nice point to, maybe we can continue it a bit. Okay, so we're just going to go with this for now. So to smoothen this out, which is going to create a hell of a lot more geometry, is we can add a set spline type, and we can set this to NURBS, which is basically going to round off all of these points here. But I reckon if I try it, my computer will crash. But if you have loads of RAM, you've got a good computer, give it a try. I'm going to give it a try as well and see if it crashes. Probably will. Drop that on, spinning wheel of death, and it seems to have worked actually, which is a surprise. And it just kind of round those edges. It's not perfect. The slower you do this, the slower you set that animation, the better the kind of like transition will be. But this is good, you know, it's smoothed out a lot of this geometry here. You could add a subdivision surface at that point maybe, but I'm just going to do this for now. So this is kind of our setup really. I guess we can go into shading now. So I'm just going to set up my camera first. Add a camera, N, view, camera to view, and just hold this out to about there, maybe something like that. Okay, so I'm just going to go into the layout and just create some furniture and view. Yeah, just going to zoom in here. Okay, so if we click on this camera here, you can go down here and go viewport settings and just turn this up. It does that. It just kind of blocks out so we know our composition well. So I'm going to set this to the shader editor, and I'm going to make a new material. So I'm just press new material, and I'm going to click new. Okay, and now I'm just going to go into rendered view. I'm going to set a HDRI. I'm going to use a studio HDRI. So now that's set, I'm just going to turn it down quite a bit, and I'm also going to add a background. So RY90, scale 2, G, pull that back, scale 5, and going to give this a new material. I'm going to set it to black, and I'm going to turn the roughness all the way up, and I'm just going to move this back even more. I might even just get rid of that so it creates kind of a black back plate. So I'm going to add a light, an area light G, and I'm going to scale this on the Y till it covers about the geometry, and then GZ, and just bring this up. And I'm going to set this to 500, which is going to be mega light. So at this point, we can probably hit save and add ambient occlusion, bloom, screen space reflections. We can go into our color management and just turn down the exposure a little bit, something like -2.5 maybe. In the look, we can go high contrast. I'm just gonna add another light, GZ, and bring this over here and just kind of highlighting this front area and just setting that to something like 500 as well, so you get this lovely kind of contour of the edges. So in shadows, I'm going to turn these down to 64 pixels. It's just going to help that fall off be a bit better. So in terms of material, I'm just going to create another camera and zoom in and view, camera to view, and I'm just going to zoom in on an area quite like. So that's quite an interesting crop. So I guess the material is quite simple. I'm going to be using transparency to help kind of build some texture in there. So I'm going to be mixing a transparent BSDF with a principled BSDF. And for now, I'm just going to turn everything off whilst I build the material. And I'm going to set this to alpha hashed. So this is how you kind of create transparent materials in Eevee. It gets quite intense on your computer, but hopefully you have quite a powerful computer. If not, you'll just have to dial down some of the settings and maybe not use transparency. So just one thing, on the camera, it looks a lot better if you actually just turn it to orthographic. It just seems to look a bit nicer. So that's something to consider. Okay, so we're going to need a texture coordinate, and we are going to need a mapping node like so. And I'm going to plug this into a color ramp. And we're just going to pull these up a little bit. Okay, and I'm going to set this to kind of like a blue, quite a strong blue, more blue, and make this white. Okay, I can plug this into the base color and add a mix shader. Plug that in there, plug this in here, and set this to something like 0.99. And then if we just hit save, this is kind of pushing Eevee to its limits using transparency like this, but I believe it just makes this so much better. So obviously the material hasn't been set yet. So what we can do is we can go into our geometry nodes and we can add a set material. So if we go Shift A, set material, and we just wait while this loads, and we just select the material we've just made. And now if we go back in, we get some quite interesting faded looks. So if we just increase this to something like 1042, just increase the samples and increase the samples for the render as well. That's way too high. This is really pushing Eevee to its limits. You know, it almost looks like cycles at this point. But, you know, once this renders, it really looks great. So, you know, we can play about with the mapping of the material, you know, where that gradient starts. So if we just make this a little bit larger, we can get a better understanding of what's going on. So, you know, it's extremely intense to render, but it looks really interesting when you get these close crops. Like so. So let's just add another light in here. So if we just leave the camera and we select this here, we just move this in a little closer, and also duplicate one and have it here. As you can see, my computer is getting really choppy at this point. It's obviously quite intense on your machine, but I think, you know, you could even do this in cycles if you preferred that sort of thing. So yeah, I just prefer using Eevee, as I think it has a similar look and it is quicker to render. But yeah, this is what you get. Obviously make sure you increase your samples. It is quite intense to render, but I think it looks great, you know. So yeah, I look forward to seeing what you guys do with this, and yeah, definitely leave a like or a comment, let me know what you guys think, and I'll see you guys soon.